The alert hit Gen Trust Financial Systems dashboard at 8:47 a.m. on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning. Transaction authentication failed. Node FL07. Error code 81102. Within 5 minutes, identical alerts surfaced across Miami, Tampa, Tallahassee. ATMs flashed authorization timeout on screens across 3 states. Mobile banking apps spun endlessly, transfers stalling mid-process. In the central IT control room at headquarters, a junior technician escalated to Tier 2 support, then Tier 3. By 9:12 a.m., they tried accessing the root authentication system. Access denied. Insufficient credentials. By 9:47 a.m., the glitch had become a blackout. Boston to San Diego, every ATM screen displayed the same message: service unavailable, contact your branch. I was sitting in a Starbucks 2 miles away when my phone buzzed with the news alert. Gen Trust Systems experiencing nationwide outages. I took a sip of espresso, set down my phone, and didn't smile. 15 minutes earlier, they'd fired me. My name's Leon Hartford. I'm 52 years old. And that morning, everything I'd built over 28 years got erased with one sentence from a CEO who never bothered to read the manual. Let me back up to this morning. I was smoothing the front of my charcoal suit when I walked into that conference room at 8:30 a.m., expecting maybe a handshake, maybe some generic thank you speech from the board. Tomorrow was supposed to be my last day. I'd even brought a box of Cuban cigars for the IT team, the legal kind you can actually buy now. Retirement was one sunrise away. But standing there was Paige Calloway, our 34-year-old CEO with her Stanford MBA smile and a paper in her hand. She didn't offer me a seat, didn't even say good morning, just held out the letter. This is effective immediately, Leon. Your role has been dissolved due to strategic restructuring. I took the letter, scanned it once, my name, my title, today's date. I looked up at her. That's final? She nodded, wouldn't meet my eyes. We appreciate your service, Leon. No, you don't, I thought. You just didn't want to pay the $2.8 million pension package that vests tomorrow. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, just folded the letter, tucked it in my jacket, and walked out. At the door, I paused. My badge hovered over the scanner one last time. Beep. Green light. Then nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and my footsteps down a hallway I'd walked for 28 years. At 8:32 a.m., my employee credentials were revoked. At 8:47 a.m., exactly 15 minutes later, Gen Trust's $24 billion daily transaction system stopped recognizing anyone else's credentials either. Now, sitting in that Starbucks watching news alerts pile up on my phone, I thought about how I'd gotten here. I'd joined Gen Trust back in 1997, fresh off a 5-year stint as a DoD contractor. Back then, banks were just starting to take digital infrastructure seriously. Most of their systems ran on mainframes that required punch cards. I was hired to modernize everything, build it from the ground up, and I did. The infrastructure, the fail-safes, the encrypted core that would eventually process 24 billion in daily transactions across 847 branches in 43 states. It wasn't just code to me, it was architecture. It was trust, written in logic. I thought about the moment that trust first broke about 15 years back. I'd found anomalies buried deep in the transaction logs, quiet signals pointing to internal money laundering, patterns that didn't make sense unless someone inside was moving money they shouldn't be moving. When I brought my findings to the executive board, they thanked me. Then they buried it. Within a week, I was uninvited from strategy meetings, reassigned from oversight roles. Suddenly, I was difficult to work with. The VP of operations told me privately, "Leon, we need you to build, not to question." But I never stopped questioning. Years later, they asked me to sign off on quarterly reports with inflated asset values. Harmless adjustment, the CFO called it. Just helps us meet street expectations. One signature and they'd fund a full scholarship for my son Daniel, Ivy League, full ride, everything paid. But I said no. The offer vanished. Daniel went to state school instead, took on $180,000 in student loans. I spent the next 8 years helping him pay those off, writing checks every month while I watched executives get bonuses for hitting numbers they'd doctored. Ethics have a cost. I paid it quietly, but I don't regret it. That's when I started building Guardian, not as a weapon, as a boundary. A contingency I hoped I'd never need. If I was allowed to retire peacefully, If they honored the contract we'd built together over nearly 3 decades, the system would transition as designed. Clean handoff, full documentation, stable succession. But if I was forcibly removed, if they violated the ethical contract that held the whole structure together, the system would protect itself. It would stop trusting anyone who'd broken that trust. I never told anyone about it. I believed, maybe naively, that people would do the right thing when it mattered most. I filed the patent in 2012. Quiet. Private LLC. No fanfare. Just documentation that said, clearly, this architecture belongs to the person who built it, and it only works if you treat that person ethically. Paige Calloway never read that documentation. None of them did. Now, 15 minutes after firing me one day before my pension vested, they were learning what happens when you erase the architect but keep living in the house he built. My phone buzzed again. Another news alert. GenTrust stock down 8% in early trading. I finished my espresso, stood up, walked out into the morning sun. The system was doing exactly what I'd designed it to do, and I was about to find out if I'd built it well enough to hold. Paige Calloway was the kind of leader who knew how to smile for the press. Clean jawline, designer, everything, raised on TED Talks and pitch decks. The media loved her. Visionary, disruptor, agile leader for the digital age. She called staff layoffs energy pivots. She referred to meetings as fireside sinks. Last year at the company gala, she handed me a commemorative plaque and called me a cornerstone of GenTrust's digital legacy. 3 weeks later, she called me a dinosaur in an open Slack channel, posted it in #LeadershipSync where 47 people could see it. She didn't think I'd notice, but I did. I saved the screenshot. Thing is, Paige wasn't dumb. 3 years ago, when she first joined as VP of Digital Strategy, she'd spent a whole afternoon in my office asking how the transaction pipeline worked. Took notes, asked good questions, wanted to understand why we'd built things the way we had. But somewhere between board pressure and investor calls, she stopped asking, started assuming, started believing the system was just legacy code that could be swapped out like an old phone. She forgot that foundations aren't interchangeable parts. They're structures built on decisions, on ethics, on trust that compounds over decades. She wanted space. Space for her people. Space for credit. The architecture I'd spent 28 years refining wasn't an asset anymore. It was an obstacle. Too complex for shortcuts. Too ethical for the kind of manipulation that makes quarterly numbers look good. So she brought in her innovation leads. Young hires with smooth LinkedIn resumes but no deep systems knowledge. They talked about AI-native rewrites and blockchain pivots without understanding that the core transaction system processed 847 branches simultaneously, 24/7, with zero downtime for 8 consecutive years. I got moved to the second row of meetings I used to lead. When I raised concerns about rushed code deployments, she'd nod politely. "We'll circle back on that, Leon." We never did. The worst moment came during the annual compliance review. I'd submitted a report titled Ethical Exit Protocols, a detailed framework outlining Guardian and its purpose. 47 pages, flagged it urgent for executive review. The document tracker showed 0 activity, not 1 view. When I followed up 2 weeks later, her assistant sent a one-line email. "We've decided not to prioritize legacy protocol reviews at this time." Legacy. That word landed like a slap. I wasn't asking to be worshipped. But after 28 years of holding the digital weight of a $340 billion institution on my back, I expected more than being treated like outdated equipment to be unplugged. I was pissed, didn't show it. But I didn't forget. Let me explain what Guardian actually is, because that's what they're dealing with right now. Most people think a system is just code, functions and variables and if-then statements. But a real system, the kind that moves billions of dollars a day without breaking, is architecture. It's layers of logic built on top of each other, each one trusting the layer below it. Guardian wasn't something I bolted on at the end. It was woven into the foundation from 2012 onward, right into the kernel-level authentication layer. Below anything their admins could touch. Below anything their innovation leads could see, even if they knew where to look. Every transaction, every single one, had to pass through a cryptographic handshake. Not just password authentication, not just two-factor. This was architectural validation. The system asking itself, do I trust the person asking me to do this? And here's the key part. The part I filed a patent for back in 2012 under Hartford Systems LLC. my private entity. The handshake validates against my active employee status. Active status means the system trusts me, trusts that I'm still part of the ethical contract we built together. If that status exists, the system responds to administrative commands. Succession plans work, transitions happen smoothly. But if that status gets revoked, if someone fires the architect before the agreed-upon retirement date, the handshake fails. Not because of malware, not because of sabotage, because the system is doing exactly what I designed it to do, protecting institutional integrity from people who don't understand what holds it together. The patent, US 47892B, covered the entire conditional authentication architecture. The if-then logic that made the system self-aware of who built it and whether they'd been treated according to the ethical framework documented in the original design specs. I didn't build Guardian to punish anyone. I built it because I'd seen what happens when institutions forget that systems are built by people, not generated by markets. I'd watch them bury evidence of money laundering, watch them pressure me to sign fraudulent reports, watch them prioritize quarterly optics over structural integrity. Guardian was my way of saying, if you're going to build on this foundation, you honor the contract. You don't fire the architect the day before his pension vests just to save money. You don't treat 28 years of work like disposable legacy code. You do it right, or the system stops listening. Now, back in that Starbucks at 9:05 a.m., I was watching my phone light up with alerts. Gen Trust systems remain offline. No ETA for restoration. Stock down 12% on technical outage concerns. Customers report locked accounts, failed transactions across all platforms. My phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Rang again. This time I recognized the area code, Gen Trust HQ. I let it go to voicemail. Third call came from Paige's direct line. I put the phone face down on the table. She wanted me to fix it. Wanted me to override Guardian, unlock the system, make it all go away so she could get back to her fireside sinks and energy pivots. But here's what she didn't understand, what none of them understood. I couldn't override it even if I wanted to. Guardian's trigger condition was time-based and irreversible. The moment my employee status was revoked at 8:32 a.m., a 15-minute countdown started. At 8:47 a.m., the system locked. Not to me, not to anyone. Because the condition had been met, architect removed prior to agreed retirement date. You can't bring someone back to a moment that's already passed. You can't unfire someone and pretend the termination never happened. The system's memory is perfect. It remembers who broke the contract. And right now, it was choosing not to trust the people who broke it. I picked up my coffee cup. Empty. I stood up, threw it away, and walked out into the parking lot. The morning was clear, cool, normal. Somewhere across town in a glass tower with wall-mounted monitors, people were starting to panic. But I wasn't panicking. I'd spent 13 years preparing for this exact scenario, hoping I'd never need it, building it anyway because hope isn't a strategy when you're dealing with people who value speed over stewardship. They'd made their choice at 8:32 a.m. The system made its choice at 8:47 a.m. Now we'd all live with the consequences. By 10:04 a.m., crowds were forming outside branches in Florida and Ohio. By 10:37 a.m., local news stations had picked it up. Gen Trust system failure enters third hour. No timeline for restoration. Twitter erupted. Some people asked if it was a cyber attack. Others feared a liquidity crisis. A few just wanted to know if they could pay rent today. I was back home by then, sitting in my garage with the door open, radio playing NPR low in the background. I had oak boards laid out on my workbench, a desk I'd been building for the past 2 months. Something solid, something real. The kind of thing that lasts because you build it right. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News alerts, texts from former colleagues, 3 more calls from Gen Trust HQ, all of which I ignored. Then, at 11:05 a.m., my email dinged. Subject line, Urgent Employment Reinstatement Offer Confidential. I opened it, skimmed the attachment, full reinstatement. Retroactive to this morning, double my original pension package, immediate compensation of $5.6 million. Sign here, report to headquarters by noon. The email came from Paige's direct account with the general counsel CC'd. They'd expedited it, notarized it, made it official. Legal wanted this airtight. 20 minutes later, a courier knocked on my door. Same contract, hard copy, sealed envelope, hand-delivered. I signed for it. Thanked the guy, closed the door. Then I called the number listed at the bottom of the contract. Paige answered on the first ring. "Leon, thank you for calling." Her voice was tight, controlled. "Look, things weren't handled well this morning. But this contract restores everything. We're making it right. Just sign it. We'll get you back in the system. You can initiate the override, and we move forward." I was quiet for a long moment. Looked out at my workbench, at the half-finished desk, at the tools I'd been using since my son was in high school. "I can't sign this page." Silence on her end. Then, "What, why not? Because it's invalid." "It's not invalid, it's legal, it's notarized. Legal reviewed every—" "It's not about legality," I said. "It's about timing. Guardian isn't just a lock, it's a condition. A time-stamped condition. I don't understand." "The system validates against my active employee status at the moment of authentication. At 8:32 a.m., you terminated that status. At 8:47 a.m., Guardian's trigger condition was met." The window closed. Her voice got sharper. "But if we reinstate you, you can't reinstate me to a moment that already passed. The system's memory is perfect, Paige. It knows the contract was broken. It knows I was fired before the agreed retirement date. You can rehire me, but you can't undo the termination that already triggered the protocol. So what are you saying? That there's no way to fix this?" I set down my coffee mug. "I'm saying I warned you. In the white paper. In the documentation. In the ethical exit protocols report that nobody read. This isn't a bug. This is the system working exactly as designed. You're holding the company hostage." "No," I said quietly. "I'm watching the company learn why foundations matter." I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times over the next hour. Each time, I let it go to voicemail. By 12:18 p.m., GenTrust's situation had gone from crisis to catastrophe. Over 84% of their digital services remained offline. Teller systems looped authentication errors. Staff tried processing transactions manually, something most hadn't done in years, if ever. Then the market hit them. At 12:23 p.m., GenTrust's stock dropped below $100 for the first time in 8 years. It kept falling. Within 15 minutes, down 22.7%. Trading floor triggered an emergency circuit breaker. I saw the alert on my phone. $4.7 billion in market capitalization. Gone. Evaporated. Because they'd saved $2.8 million by firing me a day early. The math was almost funny. Inside GenTrust's headquarters, according to texts I was getting from people still in the building, it was chaos. Janelle Brooks, the lead systems engineer, had assembled every senior tech person left. They tried everything. Cloned access keys, biometric forgeries, emergency override scripts I'd written 5 years ago for different crisis scenarios. Nothing worked. Devin Pierce, one of the younger engineers, suggested rebuilding the entire system from scratch. Clean slate, new code, secure testing environments. The estimate came back, 6 to 8 months. Minimum. Cost, $400 to $500 million. Nobody said anything after that. At 1:21 p.m., a private call went to the board chairman. By 4:04 p.m., Paige was summoned to the executive floor. 7 of 9 directors were waiting. I didn't hear about this until later, but the head of the audit committee apparently didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ms. Calloway, this board is initiating a formal inquiry into executive negligence, reckless termination of critical personnel, and resulting financial damage to shareholders. Until further notice, your decision-making powers are suspended." Paige tried to speak, couldn't find words, because the truth was undeniable now. This wasn't a system glitch. This wasn't a cyber attack. This was the collapse of a structure that had lost its architect. But the most devastating revelation came at 5:14 p.m. A junior counsel, combing through old documentation files looking for any possible way to restore access, found something in the metadata. A footnote buried in the system architecture blueprints. Copyright, C. 2012, Hartford Systems, LLC. Patent application, U.S. 6047-192B. Filed June 12, 2012. The entire Guardian framework, the layered encryption, the conditional deployment protocols, the behavioral authentication architecture, had been patented over a decade ago, under a private limited liability company. wholly owned by me. GenTrust didn't just lose their architect, they'd never owned the house. The call went to outside legal advisors, senior partners at firms that charged $1,200 an hour. They reviewed the patent filing, the original employment agreements, the licensing terms. The conclusion was clear. Without a valid licensing agreement that included ethical treatment clauses, GenTrust had no legal claim to continue using, modifying, or restoring the code. And by terminating me before the agreed-upon retirement date, they'd voided the license's moral clause. Not voided in some vague philosophical sense. Voided legally, contractually, irreversibly. There would be no lawsuit from me, no demands, no negotiations. Just structure. Just law. Just the quiet force of documentation I'd filed 13 years ago, believing I'd never need it, building it anyway because hoping for the best doesn't mean ignoring the worst. By 6:00 p.m., the board was in emergency session. By 6:47 p.m., news leaked to Bloomberg. GenTrust faces existential crisis after firing chief architect day before retirement. And I was in my garage running my hand along the smooth oak surface of a desk that was almost finished, listening to classic rock on the radio, completely alone and completely at peace. They'd had 13 years to read the documentation. They'd had 28 years to treat the foundation with respect. They'd chosen speed over stewardship. Now they were learning what happens when the structure stops holding. At 2:05 p.m., while headlines screamed about banking collapse and stock market chaos, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into a private email account I'd set up back in 2012. Clean, encrypted, linked to no employer, no institution, just me. Subject line, public clarification from Leon Hartford GenTrust system events. I kept it short. No anger, no bitterness, just facts. To all concerned parties and stakeholders, I have not tampered with, sabotaged, or interfered with GenTrust financial systems since my termination this morning. The protocol currently active is one I authored over a decade ago, Guardian, a passive contingency embedded to protect institutional integrity. Its only trigger is the unethical removal of its original architect prior to confirmed retirement transition. Once triggered, it secures the system from unauthorized succession. It is not an attack, it is not malware. It is the system choosing not to trust those who violated the ethical contract it was built upon. I do not wish harm to the institution. I only withdrew the one thing I truly owned, my trust. I attached a PDF, an email I'd sent to GenTrust's board on June 17, 2015, 10 years ago. If we ever reach a point where our systems outpace our ethics, I will have failed in my duty as an architect. I have written a safeguard, not for myself, but for the integrity of the structure. Should this board ever choose speed over stewardship, you will not need to worry about retaliation. The system will simply stop listening. I hit send. By 2:16 p.m., the statement had reached 3 internal mailing lists at GenTrust. By 2:37 p.m., it was posted on cybersecurity forums. By 3:00 p.m., it was trending on Twitter. 2 former GenTrust engineers, guys who'd left the company years ago, fed up with the same culture that had just imploded, posted the key quote, "He warned them." They laughed. The system remembered. Younger developers started sharing it, not as a scandal, as something else. A reminder that code isn't just syntax, it's decisions, it's values, it's the ethics of the person who wrote it, embedded in every conditional statement. Someone made it into a quote graphic. I only withdrew the one thing I truly owned, my trust. Within an hour, it had 50,000 shares. Some people called me a whistleblower. Others called me a systems prophet. A few called me reckless, dangerous, a disgruntled employee holding a company hostage. I didn't respond to any of it. Didn't go on camera. Didn't give interviews. Just closed the laptop, walked out to my back porch, and stood there with a fresh cup of coffee, watching afternoon light filter through the trees. Inside my house, the world was buzzing with speculation. Outside, everything was quiet. I wasn't chasing justice. I'd built it into the blueprint 13 years ago. By 3:42 p.m., GenTrust wasn't just experiencing a technical outage. They were facing a crisis of trust. Customers had waited in lines for hours, watching helplessly as transfers failed, as mortgage payments bounced, as paychecks didn't clear. And when my statement started circulating, when people realized this wasn't a hack or a glitch, but a system protecting itself from its own leadership. Sentiment shifted hard. If their own architect didn't trust them, one viral tweet read, "Why the hell should we?" At 4:25 p.m., Apex Federal Technologies, one of Gen Trust's main competitors, launched a targeted campaign. Stability you can see, systems you can trust, built by people who matter. By 4:54 p.m., 42% of Gen Trust's premier clients, the high net worth accounts that generated most of their profit, had initiated account closures or asset transfers. Inside the tower, silence. Page had been suspended. The board was in crisis mode. Legal was reviewing every employment contract signed in the past decade, looking for other potential landmines. And somewhere in the building, Janelle Brooks was probably explaining to a room full of executives that no, you can't just hire a consultant to crack the system because it's not locked, it's making a choice. And you can't hack architecture into trusting you. The call came 3 days later, Sunday afternoon. I was in the garage applying tung oil finish to the oak desk I'd finally completed. Classic rock on the radio, sunlight coming through the open door. Normal. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but the caller ID said Apex Federal Corporate. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and picked up. "Mr. Hartford, this is Richard Brennan, CEO of Apex Federal. Do you have a few minutes?" "I've got time. I'll get right to it. We'd like to offer you a position, Chief Systems Architect, design our next-generation infrastructure from the ground up, full authority over technical decisions, board seat with veto power on any architecture changes. Starting compensation package is $480,000 base, plus equity stake that vests over 4 years." I didn't say anything. He continued. "But here's what I really want you to know, Mr. Hartford. I read your Guardian documentation, all 47 pages. I highlighted sections, I made notes in the margins, and the question I kept asking myself was, how do we make sure this never happens to us?" I set down the oil rag. "You read the documentation. Every word. That's why I'm calling. We don't need you to save us. We want to build something with someone who understands that foundations aren't disposable, that ethics aren't optional, that the people who build systems matter as much as the systems themselves." I looked at the desk in front of me. Smooth grain, solid joints. Built to last because I'd taken the time to do it right. "I'll think about it," I said. "Take your time." "But Leon, may I call you Leon?" "Sure. Don't think of this as us hiring you. Think of it as us asking to learn from you." We talked for another 20 minutes. He asked about my approach to security architecture, about ethical frameworks and system design, about how I'd handled the money laundering discovery back in 2010. He knew the details. He'd done his homework. This wasn't a recruitment pitch. It was a conversation between two people who understood that systems are built by humans for humans, and the ethics of the builder matter. When we hung up, I stood in the garage for a long moment, looking at my workbench, at the tools I'd been using since my son was in high school, at the desk that had taken 2 months to build right. Then I heard a car pull into the driveway. Daniel walked into the garage carrying 2 paper bags. "Brought lunch," he said. "Figured you might not be leaving the house much. Appreciate it." We sat on stools by the workbench, eating sandwiches, not talking much at first. He'd just turned 28 last month. Software engineer at a startup in Austin. Smart kid. Took after his old man, apparently, in more ways than one. "So," he finally said, grinning, "you're trending on Hacker News. They're calling you a legend." I took a bite of my sandwich. "I'm not a legend, Daniel. I just didn't let them forget who built the foundation." He nodded, got quiet for a second. Then, "You taking the Apex offer? You heard about that already? Word travels. Tech industry's pretty small when something like this happens." I'd been thinking about it nonstop since Brennan's call. The money was good, better than Gen Trust, honestly, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the conversation we'd had, the fact that he'd read the documentation, the fact that he understood why I'd built Guardian in the first place. "Probably," I said, still thinking. Daniel looked at the finished desk, ran his hand along the surface. "This is beautiful, Dad. You gonna keep it?" "Yeah, thinking I'll use it in whatever home office I set up next." He smiled. "You earned it." We finished lunch. He helped me clean up the workbench, organize tools I'd left scattered during the week's chaos. We didn't talk much about Gen Trust. Didn't need to. He understood. As he was getting ready to leave, I remembered something. Hold on, I said. I walked to the cabinet in the corner, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the box I'd stored there Tuesday morning. Cuban cigars. The ones I'd bought to share with the IT team on my last day. Never got the chance. Here, I said, opening the box and offering Daniel one. Legal now. He grinned. You saving these for something? Was gonna hand them out on my retirement day. Didn't work out that way. I took one for myself, lit it. But this works too. We stood in the garage, smoke curling toward the rafters, radio playing low. Outside, GenTrust was still dealing with lawsuits, still trying to rebuild what I'd spent 28 years creating, still facing the reality that you can't just replace a foundation and expect the building to stand. Inside, I had my son. I had a job offer from people who actually understood what I'd built, and I had the quiet knowledge that I'd done it right. You know what the best part is? Daniel asked. What's that? You didn't have to fight them. You didn't have to sue or go public or any of that. You just built it right from the start. And when they screwed up, the system spoke for you. I took a slow drag on the cigar, let the smoke out. That was always the idea. Don't build weapons, build boundaries. He raised his cigar slightly. I raised mine back. To foundations, he said. To foundations. 3 months later, I accepted Apex's offer. Not immediately. Not desperately. I negotiated. Board seat, yes. Veto power on architecture decisions, non-negotiable. Equity stake, vested over 4 years with clauses that protected me if they ever tried pulling what GenTrust did. And one more thing, a clause in my contract that said I could walk away at any time if they violated the ethical framework we'd agreed to document together, in writing. Reviewed quarterly, they agreed to everything. The day I started, Brennan walked me to my new office. Actual office, not a cubicle, with windows that looked out over downtown, and handed me a binder. Your guardian documentation, he said. I had our legal team review it. We're implementing similar ethical protocols into our core architecture, with your guidance, obviously. We're calling it Foundation. I opened the binder, my white paper printed and bound, sections highlighted, notes in margins, questions written on sticky tabs. You actually read it, I said, 3 times, and I'm going to make sure every executive here reads it too. Because you were right, Leon. Systems aren't just code, they're trust, and trust has to be earned. I set the binder on my new desk, the oak one I'd built in my garage, the one I'd had delivered here earlier that week, and looked out the window. GenTrust was still operational, barely. They'd hired an outside firm to rebuild their core systems, cost them $480 million and counting. Stock had recovered slightly but never got back to where it was. Paige had resigned 6 weeks ago. Last I heard, she was consulting for startups, teaching them about agile transformation. I didn't feel satisfaction watching them struggle, didn't feel vindication, just a quiet sense that the structure had held exactly as it was supposed to, because I hadn't designed Guardian to punish them. I designed it to protect the system from people like them, people who thought foundations were disposable, who thought ethics were optional, who thought you could erase the architect and keep living in the house like nothing had changed. They learned. And now I was building something new, with people who understood that you don't build things to last by cutting corners. You build them by honoring the work, respecting the workers, and remembering that every system, no matter how complex, runs on trust. The system remembered, and this time, so would they.